Welcome to the Understanding Politics podcast. Today we have a special episode that we're very excited to share with you. We are excited to present the very first Understanding Politics debate. My co-host Michael will be debating friend of the show, David Jaeger. David, thanks for being here.
Hi, thanks for having me here again. I think I was on I know I was on an earlier episode, but it's good to be back.
Yeah.
I like this group and I like talking to this group. And if you're seeing the video on the Instagram account or anything, this flag behind me is satire. Right there. It's satire. I don't like this one, so don't worry.
All right. So David did previously appear on our episode about Australian and American politics. We had a really good conversation there, and we're glad to have him back for this episode. For this episode, we're going to be discussing capitalism, democracy, and communism, as well as some other stuff, and really comparing Michael and David's viewpoints. I'm going to be moderating and asking the questions. Before we jump into the episode, we wanted to plug our sponsor, Podmatch. Podmatch gives the Understanding Politics podcast access to top-notch political guests and has helped us secure interviews with our previous guests on the show, such as Lee Snyder, Dr. Nesso, and Chief Cronin. With a link in our description, you can join Podmatch today to start your own podcast while helping ours out in a big way. So thanks for watching, and without further ado, let's jump into the episode. And we're going to ask the first question. This one goes to you first, David, but Michael, you can jump in at any time. It's going to be more of an open style debate. So can any country become a democracy?
I think any country can. Yeah, I think any country can become anything they want to. Whether the people want to or, whether the government has control of the people, that sort of thing. I think it's harder in a lot of countries because there's already that preconceived sort of cultural and sort of traditional ways of ruling that have always been there, and only until there's been Western intervention has there ever been anything else other than that. So I think any country actually definitely can become a democracy. I also think any country can become a dictatorship. I think any country can become, communist. I think any country can become anything. I think it's just whether the people will it and how they will it, and then who's also backing the people or the government itself. So I think there's a lot of different sort of I think there's a lot of different things that can influence it. So I think so. I think any country can become democratic. It's just it just takes a while.
Yeah, and I think we've seen
that sort of stuff
over and over again in history. America kind of forced countries into becoming a democracy. I'd like to expand the question a little bit. That is, should every country be a democracy? My answer would be yes. Because as we've seen over and over again, done by peer-reviewed studies, we've seen democracies have higher rates of press freedom, higher living standards, higher, what do they call them? Life expectancies, higher GDPs per individuals. We've seen them, commit less human rights abuses in their own country. Abroad, it's a little bit different. And the place I lie on the political spectrum, as a social democrat, I'm kind of a little bit weary when it comes to being a little bit more interventionist or saying, I like to focus more on the human rights when we first invade a country. We shouldn't have invaded Iraq if we knew there wasn't weapons of mass destruction, but I think we should do more stuff like the Marshall Plan, for example, which after World War II, America, a leading democracy in the world, built up countries like Greece. And Greece is probably a bad example because they're still struggling. But we built up strong countries like Germany, like Japan, that have actually outpaced America when it comes to life expectancy, outpaced America when it comes to public transportation and public education, stuff that a democracy should be leaders on. And I think me and David might have different views on capitalism, but I think at least he might agree with me a little bit on, kind of the more regulatory state of capitalism, the more kind of bureaucracies, David might think, 100% of power should go to the state. I don't think that's certain at all. And I actually do think a lot of communist parties and far right parties have a lot in common when it comes to breaking norms of democracy, trying to be in power too long, not having stable transitions of power, and also, ruining press freedom, just like Viktor Orban has done on the right, just like Vladimir Putin has done on the right, just like Joseph Stalin did on the left when he was in office. The propaganda is strong in those countries.
Can I just jump in? I'm
And
not a Stalinist at
even
all. I
compared,
don't like Stalin.
America ranks higher than Russia any day on the press freedom.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, sure.
Of course it is. Look at it, Russia. It's in shambles.
Yeah. Well,
the country in turmoil. They always have been.
I mean, it's better than Cuba. It's better than Venezuela. I mean, the GDP per country. Look at China, too. I mean, it's just every country should aspire to be a democracy, because there's no end of history, and politics are always going to change. States are always going to go from left to right to left to right. We've seen it in America's history for the short 250 years, and that's just kind of what politics is. But we want it to stay in the confines of a democratic process where there's a clear transition of power and stable institutions. So
I think you're getting a bit confused there, because communism isn't itself a governing authority. It's more or less an economic authority. So what I mean by that is you can have democratic elections and everything under communism. Whether they be legitimate or not is another question. I always think that democracy and elections should be held in some way or form. Personally, in an ideal world, in an ideal society that I've sort of envisioned, which a lot of people don't hold the same values as me, but the sort of thing that I would like to see is the dismantling of parties, specifically like political parties in a way. For example, like if I was to have a government or a council of any sort of form, it would be more or less people of certain areas that are elected by their people, not a party or any sort of clique or group or anything. And a lot of people will argue that but then how do you know that there's like not stuff going under the table sort of thing? How do you know that there's actually this person's legitimate, their vote's legitimate, all of that? But I think it's easier to have one person under a microscope than a whole party in its entirety. So whether the country itself is, and this is the whole thing, because you can have democratic capitalist countries that genuinely want anti-corruption laws, same as you can have communist countries the communist democratic countries and whatnot that want no sort of corruption. It's all that sort of stuff. They can all be the same. It's just a different sort of economic policies, and then who also controls the production, all of that. I think it's more. I think democracy and elections should be held just in a different way, because I feel like how it is at the moment is so divisive, and you've got people who otherwise would love each other and be unified, pledging their allegiance to an elephant or a donkey or Labour and Liberal. Oh. And it's sort of like, I feel like humans have much more in common than we realize than just politics. So I feel like putting that sort of stuff aside and instead standing for someone and voting for someone for your local area that aligns, who you think would do a good job, would more or less do better than a party who's in the pockets of lobbies and companies and corporations, oil companies, all of that sort of stuff. Oh, yeah. So it's that sort of thing. I want to see a world that's not fractured. I don't want to see a perfect world that I envision is, like, I don't know, people standing behind people, not a product. Because at the end of the day, political parties end up becoming a brand. And if you don't subscribe to this brand, then you're either with this one, and it flip-flops in between, and people I feel like people can feel like outcasted a lot by selecting a certain political party, and then the others feel angered that this person would think this way. So instead of having a party like, say, your Democrats and your Republicans, have every single group an independent that contributes to a council, an overarching council that has elected members like a speaker and all that sort of stuff. So I think democracy should exist. I'm not opposed to it. I don't think we should go to a dictatorship. As I was saying before, I don't like Stalin. In fact, I would have liked Trotsky to get in instead of Stalin, because Trotsky was a scholar. He was a man of the people. He said when he became the Chancellor of Foreign Affairs in the Soviet Union during the end of World War One, he said, because they'd just taken power, the Bolsheviks had just taken power. So they said, hey, instead of fighting the Germans, how about we don't fight, and then they'll just give up. So that's what they ended up doing. They just didn't want to. Trotsky was a man of the people, and if Russia, the Soviet Union, went down the path of having Trotsky as its leader, I feel like it would have been much more stable if Stalin hadn't been put in charge of he was basically hiring people for their office. So he was putting in his friends. So they all ended up, all that sort of stuff. But look, I'm not saying that the Soviet Union or anything like that should still exist. In the ways that it's been done, you've got dictatorships in communist countries, which isn't the preconceived, it's the preconceived notion, but it's not the notion that actual communists want. I think there's a new age term for it. And I think it's become such a blur between people that aren't educated about it, and then people who even are educated about it but unsure about certain things. So yeah, I feel like that's it, but it's whatever.
I mean, this is distinctly, this is right out of Marxist literature, is that one party rule, and is that all else whoever dissents be damned. I mean, this is kind of what we've seen from cancel culture in the United States, and what I get scared about. And communist countries are allowed to run, for example, in the European Union, they have like 20 or 30 representatives in there out of 700, compared to the more centrist parties. But I also want to talk about your take on political parties. I think there's a different case to be made about the human psychology. We actually seen here in America that liberals like to live with other liberals, and conservatives like to live with other conservatives. And I don't really think there is bridging the gap when it comes to a polarization in America. I think you're kind of right. And, Britain's done this with de-evolution and kind of their city governments, but America has been trying to do this with the state governments for a long time. But now the Supreme Court kind of messed that up with, they furthered it with Jackson v. Dobbs, which let abortion come to the states. But they kind of ruined it with Obergefell v. Hodges, which took gay marriage away from the states. They ruined it with Bruin versus New York State, which took away gun license from states if they had those kind of laws. Is pick the state that you want to live in that aligns more with your political ideology and that aligns more with your economic ideology. For example, if you have a master's degree, if you believe education is a human right, if you believe that labor rights are a human right, come live in New York, come be in a multiracial, working class, democratic society. And if you believe that you should be able to practice God freely, if you believe that, marriage is only between a man and a woman, if you believe abortion is a sin, if you believe that a Bible should dictate some parts of policy, go live in Texas, go live in Florida. Like this, we've seen this over and over again in America, that people naturally sort to their political, for lack of a better word, comrades. So I mean, in a bigger state like America, of course we're going to need parties to specify the differences. But I think that also just touches on federalism. But I was trying to think what you were saying about Trotsky and Stalin and all. I mean, to get back to communism, I mean, it's just sometimes, sometimes you want to critique communist countries, but then they're not true communist countries, and they, workers were supposed to,
Well,
equally.
there's propaganda on both sides. I don't doubt that. I don't doubt there's things that are much better in
But I
communist
mean,
countries than
we've
capitalist
seen,
countries,
we've
and
seen,
vice versa.
we've seen, Stalin, with the gulags. We've seen that they.
Yeah, but what did America have? America had concentration camps for Japanese people, so
Nothing like the gulags. Nothing compared to.
oh, it wasn't bad. It wasn't
No,
as bad. We had internment camps, but it wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad, guys. They actually liked it.
1.3 billion people in China live off of $2,000 a year in GDP in real terms. Is that humane to you? Does that sound like a democratic, humane country to you? I just want to know, because they claim to be communist.
Communist China
Okay.
communist China makes its money and it's
But it's
capital
communism,
off the
but
backs
then
of
it's
their
not
workers,
real
which is something
communism.
that's no, because communist China makes its money off the backs of the people. If Mao Zedong was alive today, he would be rolling in his grave for what Xi Jinping has done. It's such an outreach.
No,
from communists.
it'd be
It's
even
an
worse
excuse
than it is
to
now.
have power. It's an excuse to have power, and it's just wrong.
No, us globalizing with them has actually raised standards in that country. Has actually stopped a lot of brutality and authoritarianism that Mao went through when he went through the Great Leap, when he went through his programs. You can go to Wikipedia right now. Like, it's a non-for-profit. Like, it's no political party runs it, no government. You can do a quick Google search and just see how many atrocities China has perpetrated on their citizens. I mean, I know America is no pie in the sky when it comes to that, especially when,
all countries commit atrocities, and to label them as specifically communist or capitalist is it's wrong, because it's what it is people. If there's autonomous power and supreme power given to an individual, people have their own biases, so they will do things. So,
I mean,
but then that's not true, because America can go to war with any sort of country in the Middle East for oil, and they can commit atrocities there. I mean, look at what they did to that Australian bloke that went over there, Julian Assange.
All right, if I could butt in quick, this kind of pivots to one of our next questions that I have here for both of you to answer. In your opinion, what role does America play on the global stage? I mean, obviously, we live in America. We know things that happen in America, but love to hear both your takes on, do you believe America is the good guys? Are we fighting for the right thing? I open that up to both of you.
I would like to start with this one because I feel like it could give something Michael to respond to. But I don't think there's necessarily a good guy and a bad guy. It's very black and white. To Americans, you'll see yourselves as a good guy, but then there's a lot of countries that won't. And I feel like Australia is one of the countries that possibly do. But I feel like American interventionism is the cause for a lot of destabilization in a lot of regions in the world. So I don't know, like there's a lot of Central American, South American countries and Middle Eastern countries that are just fully destabilized, and you've got the terrorist groups that America funded during the Cold War to overthrow their governments and all of that. And it's just, I feel like, they're all fighting them to this day, and it's so messy, but I feel like there's no definitive bad guy and there's no definitive good guy, in a sense.
I mean,
Michael, your response?
Maduro, the Taliban, Yemen, it's just far right, fundamentalist Islams, countries after country in the Middle East. And I know David likes to make the oil point, and I know we've all made the joke in our lives, and it's funny, haha. But at the end of the day, America having energy independence and America being the global superpower that it is a good thing. And while David says, it destabilizes these countries, that's true. But what is there to begin with in these countries? There's no,
for example, they could be exporting their own materials.
I gave you your time. Look, there's
Mr.
no
President, let him speak.
all right.
Mr. President, let him speak.
There's no free and fair elections. There's no capitalist marketplace. There's no technology. There's no great living standards in these countries. It's the real GDP. Again, it's similar to China. It's an embarrassment. There's slave labor. There's slavery in those countries. Girls are still second-class citizens to men. So for sure,
But
look,
what's changed since American interventionism?
look, let me just make this point. I'm all for raising immigration caps in America to make sure these people can make it safely to America and start a new life here. We need to get their country in wraps first, because we cannot trust those leaders in their country. But if we had access to these oil reserves, if we fixed the market, if we had more supply, so we could, even out demand, because there's always going to be too much demand for oil. If we were able to, lower prices for oil, think about in real terms what that would do for the economy, how we could invest in public schools, how we could invest in more corporate subsidies, how we could push the American economy forward. It just seems like, we got too overambitious when we went and we invaded Iraq, on false terms. But if we were actually serious with the American people and told them, look, here are the pros, here are the cons, these people could contribute to the American economy. I just read an article this week that the American economy could miss out on $3 trillion over 10 years for the worker shortages that we have. Like, seems like a no-brainer to me, but yes, America is a good force on the global stage, and the chance for these people to have a better life in America than the one they have now it's kind of a no-brainer to me.
But I think so. Those countries being bad, like those countries being third world countries and not having the infrastructure and all of that, that's due to, if you look at countries like Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, and all of that, and then in Northern Africa and whatnot, they've been invaded and colonized by the British since basically they were able to get on boats and go anywhere. So you've already had multiple years of colonization, and then on top of that, you've had your corporations from the West come in and then take a hold of their natural resources, which they could be using to better themselves or that sort of stuff. Even though these countries do have bad political leaders, I don't doubt that. They absolutely do. But is that the fault of themselves, or what's the driving force behind these people coming into power? Whether it be the puppet governments that the United States set up and the West set up, even Britain and whatnot, be it the puppet states that they've set up, and then the terrorist groups that have either been funded by the USSR or the United States to overthrow these said governments, it's created a sort of power vacuum in these certain areas, and there's just it's going to be going on forever. It's sort of, I think, look, it's unfair for a company and for a country that's already developed to go into another country, take their oil resources, better their own country overseas with these resources and selling them, exporting them, whatever. And then, telling their people, hey, come over here because it's better. It's sort of what you were saying before with the states. If you don't like living in this state, move somewhere else. I think that's a very old-fashioned way of thinking, and it's more or less the tribal sort of, hey, if you don't like the problem in that cave, go live in that cave because they've got this going on. It's not simple, and there's no sort of simple way to sort of stabilize these areas without just letting them sort of.
I mean, that's the problem. The political leaders. There's no political capital to improve these countries.
But what has America done in the 60 plus years that they've been in these countries? They've just taken and they haven't given.
Tried to help, tried to establish democracy and not communism and not Marxism. That's clearly that's the problem. The leaders are bad. We can't leave the leaders to govern because they commit crazy war that
But then these countries,
America could only dream of.
most of these Middle Eastern countries aren't communists. They're dictatorships, and
I
that's
know
the
they're
thing that I'm saying before.
fundamentalist Islams. Yes,
Communism isn't
they're
a leading
awful.
form. The leading form's a dictatorship. Whether it be a monarchy or a democracy. Say
Yes.
capitalism versus communism. It's not communism versus democracy. And
Well,
that's a completely different argument in itself.
no, because
These countries aren't communist. They haven't been communist. They've been under communist sort of invasion. Afghanistan had been invaded by the USSR before the United States. So, which doesn't even make sense because that's a form of imperialism, which goes against what the USSR wanted. So,
the thing is, they don't have any institutions to even try communism. But I wanted to talk about Qatar for a second, because I mean, we've seen your whole response of, okay, don't let the US intervene. We haven't intervened in Qatar, and we actually let them host the World Cup. And I mean, Qatar had to globalize. It's pretty much the only thing it can do is sell its oil, right? Like you said. And we've let, a constitutional monarch reign power in there. And we've seen, when they constructed the stadiums in Qatar, the estimates from The Guardian was around 6,000 people died in those constructions.
yeah, that's awful.
Women are still denied
better working conditions, because that's awful. That's
women.
dreadful.
Yeah, but those are the leaders that you want to keep in there, because they're not going to
I don't want those leaders.
We need to establish democracy so we can get the bad leaders out of there. That's the whole point of America. And look, this is with
That's
Qatar.
the whole point of America.
Well, look, Qatar, women are still treated second. Look at the LGBTQ protests that happened during the World Cup.
I agree with you. You're preaching to the
Armbands
choir.
were ripped off
You're
of
preaching
players.
to the choir.
Shirts were ripped off of players. Who knows what they do to their own citizens if they're doing that to world-class
You're
soccer
preaching to the choir.
players.
This is exactly what I'm saying. These people no. What it is,
Okay.
it's different. It's so the United States is. It's so. It's. I don't want these governments in power. They're not for the people. I feel like the people themselves should be funded. These people themselves should be.
But these people don't have civics class. They don't know how to govern. They haven't had the access to education that other Western countries have. Look at the literacy rates in some of these African countries that you want these leaders to take over in. We're talking like 30% for most of them, for men.
It's not these leaders, though.
Nonetheless,
Stop saying these leaders.
women,
I don't want them in
10%.
power.
All right. Try not to talk over each other. One at a time.
Okay, I just want to clarify something. It's not these leaders. I'm not for them. These are not communist. I don't like dictatorships. They should not exist.
And how do we get rid of them? We have to intervene, right? That's kind of politics 101. Like, welcome to mutual aid.
Yeah, well, no, I've always been for aid. I think it's the way that America goes around it, because they can always see a profit to be made in these countries, and I feel like that should be set aside. And the first thing that should come sort of into the eye is sort of firstly making these countries, livable and have livable working conditions and all of that sort of stuff, and working infrastructure and all of that. Whether that be done by foreign aid is fine. I feel like interventionism, when it's to go into these countries and then set up puppets, isn't good. I don't like puppets. I feel like countries, they should be given foreign aid, and they should be given coaching and schooling and tutoring and how to rule and all this sort of stuff by multiple different sort of sources. But I feel like going in and just straight up setting a CIA funded coup or a puppet is not the way to go around it. And I feel like that's a very high moral dilemma. It's like if the USSR, so think of it this way, it's like if the USSR staged a coup in the United States. You wouldn't be too happy.
Well, no, because
no, and you wouldn't like it if they set up a puppet government in any of your states.
I mean, yes, because the USSR Okay.
But exactly.
Well,
So it's not.
I mean,
It,
the human rights,
it's
it's like nothing.
yeah, but human rights.
USSR.
You want to keep on
I
talking
thought you
about
didn't
human
like the
rights. Look at what the
USSR.
United States have done.
Look, well, no, okay. COP 27.
Let's shift the
No,
the
no, no. I want to make
conversation.
a point. No.
Okay.
COP,
Okay, then we're gonna change.
well, look at COP 27. These are the leading democracies in the world. It's a climate action pledge, and they just established that these African countries need help, and they just created the fund that they just came up with during their most recent meeting. I mean, democracy and capitalism is the way forward, gives these countries more access, and God, I can't even the USS. I mean, look at you want to talk about democratic countries intervening. Look at how North Korea is when China intervened. Are you 13?
I'm not
Okay.
for that. That's completely different.
And what
I
are
don't
you?
like that.
This is what I'm saying, is that communism leads to political revolution, and political revolution is bad because the wrong people get into power, people that you don't want, but they will end up coming into power. That is why I'm not a communist anymore.
Let's talk about January 6th. Let's talk about, in general, revolutions in the West. Let's talk about, do we think the West is due for revolutions? Do you think that United States people should, not necessarily a physical revolution, but like a political revolution? Like, are things good, set for the future the way they are? Or, do we have to consider making some serious changes to our leadership? I'll open it up to both of you, whoever wants to answer first.
I'll go first again because I feel like that's just been the pattern. Definitely ways around having revolution, but there's also different ways that revolution can be instated. There could be national referendum, whether that be by the will of the people and all that sort of stuff. There can be peaceful revolutions and there can be forceful revolutions. But a lot of the time what you see is with these forceful revolutions, it's usually the minority in the country, whether it be the January 6th one with the MAGA coup and all that sort of stuff. It's usually a minority, a very loud minority that everyone's kind of tired of anyway. I feel like the way forward is through peaceful referendum, policy changes and all of that. I don't really want to see any more bloodshed or sort of discourse and the violent discourse or anything in that. I feel like the West is due for a referendum. Look, and I'm not saying the East isn't. They are. They definitely are. They're long overdue for referendum. But the West itself has become so materialist, so boxed in, and so concerned with what's going on over here that we've forgotten the real issues in the world. So I feel like in order to go forward, we need to take power from these companies that have asserted themselves as global international monopolies and instead divert that somewhere else, whether it be to housing, whether it be to infrastructure, whether it be having working public transport and reliable public transport. It's overall fixing all of that sort of stuff. I feel like January 6th, in all seriousness, I feel nothing would have happened even if they did. I don't know really what they were trying to do. They were trying to break into the Capitol building. Nothing would have been done. Nothing would have changed. And in fact, they would have come out as the loser. They would have had, well, they did. They came out as the loser, being looked upon as silly. So I don't know. I feel like the way forward is through peace and referendum. It's just, yeah, I could go on, but.
I mean, look, some people have said, democracy's natural lifespan is 250 years. America, we've seen a civil war in the 1860s. We could have easily had one in the 1960s. It kind of actually, I wish we had talked more about this in previous questions, but it kind of plays back to culture and also in a broader sense to identity. And it's something that, as a liberal, as a social democrat, and identity shift, people assimilate, cultures change, diversity is our strength. I'm not going to make a case for, a white ethno state or something like that. But
No, we're all on the same page here.
yeah, we're all on the same page there. But you see with Europe now and the European Union that there is kind of, a reluctancy to kind of accept unelected bureaucrats and liberal bureaucracies, which is a shame. As someone who studies political science, I think, those kind of, credentialed experts who know what they're talking about when it comes to tax policy and climate change is the way forward. And we can't really, let each member of Congress, look over each detail of our country. It's impossible. They'd be working 70-hour work weeks. But I think some places in the next 100 years, there probably will be, I don't know, even in America, I mean, easily could. I mean, there's fractures in the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. Like David said, all it takes is a loud minority. I think there's multiple loud minorities. There's always a chance. History is it is not not reluctant to repeat itself. So I think January 6th was a horrible thing. I think it could have gotten a lot worse in just minutes. I think members of the Senate could have been killed. We could be having a whole different discussion today. America could look a lot different than it is now. I'm like what David said. I think we have a lot of agreement in this. It's just kind of, good ballot referendums, political revolution through the ballot box, stuff like that, kind of the changes we want to see to government. Not kind of changing institutions a little bit too much. I don't think America
It's a
should
slow process and it shouldn't
Yeah.
be done instantly. There should be
Yeah.
if
Like, I
anything
don't
were to change, it should be a slow transition
Yeah.
so that people can sort of work things out.
I don't know, like, I think I would like to see the Constitution change, but I think amendments, maybe, like, I've seen graphics like Gen Z is all blue in every state. Like, maybe we'll write a constitution that's similar to Germany and Japan's, or whatever, the European articles, since it's not technically a constitution, but one that guarantees, the right to gay marriage and the right to labor unions and the right to a bachelor's degree, stuff like that. So that's pretty much, that's the only political revolution I want to see. I mean,
Yeah, that's
there
what I
could,
want to see. But
yeah,
whether things, it's different. So it's like what we were saying before with the Middle Eastern countries and all of that. Sometimes violence it's the final solution. As funnily enough,
Mhm.
it's the final. I feel like it's the final sort of, if change can't be done peacefully, it can't be discussed and it can't be pushed forward, even though it's the majority want this, I feel like then and only then should violence be taken. And even then, it should be very, very carefully done as to not anger certain groups and all that sort of stuff. But I feel like, I don't know, with the January 6th thing and all of that, it's so bizarre. It's so weird. I don't really know what their whole outcome was. I feel like it was just to go in there and cause as much destruction as they possibly could. There wasn't any sort of end goal. There wasn't, I mean, like, they had an end goal, but were they going to reach that? Absolutely not. It was almost impossible.
Yeah.
Revolutions in the West, violent revolutions in the West are a thing of the past. They will never happen anymore. Governments have gotten, mass. Whether you can divide the military and all that sort of stuff is a different question. But if the military stays loyal to the government, they're always going to have technology and weapons that the civilians can only dream of. So I don't
I
know.
can't believe I think this speaker vote we've seen in the House and kind of, the willingness of, there's there's people on the left that agree with some of Matt Gates' goals. I actually think there should be term limits. That Washington is too corrupt. It's almost kind of a communist angle, like David was saying, that the politicians don't best represent the people, and
No.
there's a different way of going about it. There has been some cracks to that. Whether it's Brexit or whether it's the weakening of the European Union, and whether it's the rise of the far right in Italy, France, the coup attempted in Germany. There will always be an appetite for dismantling a central government and stuff like that, and that's why I wake up every day and fight for democracy and fight for America, pretty much. So, but there always is possibility.
Interesting.
People
Okay.
can-
Yeah, let's move on to the next question. So the next thing we've got here is where would you like to see the world in 20 years? We'd love to hear each of your viewpoints on 2043. What's it going to look like? What do you want it to look like, and what do you think it might actually look like?
What I would like to see is possibly more socialist policies adopted worldwide, whether it be workers' unions, whether it be better working conditions for workers, all that sort of stuff. I want to see better infrastructure worldwide, affordable free public transport for all. I want to see free housing for people that don't have anywhere to live. Somewhere they can go for rest, and then have organizations have soup kitchens and all of that. I want to see the government and the power in the government given more so to the people than to compared to a lot of plutocracies that there are on the planet, such as the United States and those dictatorships worldwide, where the rich rule. I feel like I want to see a more diversified ideological future, more open to political discourse than we've ever seen. I want to, and not so just in the next 10, 20, 40, 80 years. I want to be able to see, and only for the means of working towards a better future and different ideologies and different governing bodies, I want to be able to see whether it be democracies, both capitalist, communist, and all of that. I want to see monarchies. I want to see all of that working together on an international scale. I don't want divide, and I don't want democracies to always feel like communism is a direct threat on them. We're past the Red Scare. I want to see a more diverse future in a political sense. I want to be, because not only will we be more open to political discourse, if that's the case, we'll be able to work towards finding out a better governing body. How old's democracy? Democracy's been around since the times of the Iroquois. And it has been amended and all of that sort of stuff, but I don't think it's been the best so far. But I feel like people are missing out on discovering new different types of governments and inventing and all of this sort of stuff. And I feel like that's probably the way forward, with more political openness, more political, all of that sort of stuff. I would like to see international research funded by the public and the people. And I just want to see I want to see services that actually afford people, all of that sort of stuff. So whether that's achievable in the next 10 years is another question. There would have to be something, I feel, near life-changing for that to happen, but you never know. So, I just want to see less political discourse and more people inventing, thinking, coming up with new things and new ways to govern, and not being so close-minded as to this is the only way. How about we experiment with different things, and how about we sort of move forward in that way? Because if history's told us anything, when people work together, that's when a lot of the best things come out of humanity, I feel.
I mean, when we talked to Dr. Nasto, he surprised me a little when he said social democracy is the third way, is the political center in most of the world. And where I would like to see the world in 20 years, I would like to see, all countries, practicing social democracy. I still want to reward wealth. I still want to see people, achieve their goals and try to make it to the top too, and become great businessmen, and also pursue their passions and have other careers. And I think that's the only way that can exist. That's kind of why I'm against communism. But to kind of refute some of David's points, he wants to see the diversification of political or political thought and stuff. I mean, we do have that in America. We do have, a solid right party and a solid left party. And I mean, I would just not like to see nukes be deployed in 20 years, or any World War III happen in 20 years. And this kind of pie in the sky experimentation with different political ideologies. No, I would like to see Western democracies stay the same. The only nukes I would want to see dropped on would be dictators in Russia and in China, to be exact. So that's kind of the main difference. In 20 years, I think we kind of, it's kind of hard to tell per exactly. And my ideology wants to see the world a different way, but ultimately it's the people with their assets and with their power that go and make the decisions, no matter their income, no matter their race, no matter their religion. They still get to vote at the end of the day. And in countries like America, I mean, David wants to say we're a plutocracy, and democracy has been overrun by all this big money, where there's, for example, we'll take Texas. A lot of people don't like Ted Cruz's views, but a majority of Texans, do support open carry. As crazy as it is, I'm no Ted Cruz defender, but that's democracy in Texas. A lot of people do support abortion bans, up to 6 weeks, and I can advocate from my position, and I can also realize that people have different positions than me, and I can concede that ground to them. And that's where I differ when I say, communism is just not something that I want to see in America or in most of the world. And I think that's where me and David might differ a little. But
David, do you have a response at all?
No, not really.
Okay. All right. Well, then we'll move on to the next question. I mean, we could talk about, what do you think needs to change about what we're doing right now to get to the futures you guys would like to see?
I think it's very obvious.
All
me
right,
too.
Michael.
I mean, yeah, that's kind of, yeah. I mean, that's kind of, I mean, of course, I would like to see Bernie style candidates, change the Democratic Party. And I would like to see January 6th insurrectionists be out of the Republican Party, and Donald Trump post Stop the Steal, be out of the Republican Party. But
Is he still in?
Yeah. He's yeah. I mean, because the people voted him to be. I know it's crazy, but people actually have the right to vote in America, unlike some other countries that are on the backdrops of walls. So just throwing it out there. People can be stupid and make stupid decisions, but at least they get to make decisions. So I don't want to change that.
All right. So the next thing we had to talk about, we wanted to talk about NATO and the UN, kind of Western, it kind of ties into another question about like Western democracy and globalization in general. Kind of just here where you are on that. What do we think about NATO and the UN? Are they, the best way we could be handling international affairs, or are there better alternatives?
I think alliances between governments have been, that's ancient. It's been there since like the beginning of time almost. The Allies, the Axis, the Central Powers, the Entente, the greater Eastern Asian sphere of influence, all of that sort of stuff. So I don't know. I think it's just another thing. It will, whether it's good or bad, it's not really up to me. I don't really. It's they all do bad things and good things. It's just and they have a right to exist. They obviously do. UN was set up at the end of World War II by
Was
Winston
it US,
Churchill,
UK,
Joseph Stalin, and America. Who was it in power? It wasn't. It was
FDR.
Truman, wasn't it?
There you go.
Yeah, it was Truman. And so they set all of that up, and then the UN was created, and then the Soviet Union was kicked out. It's all that sort of stuff. So, it has a right to exist, whether it's going to last, forever. It won't. If anything shows us anything about NATO, the Allies, the Entente, all of that, they all once existed. Now they don't. And they exist in some different form now. So whether that be NATO, stuff like the UN, which is a bit different, it's sort of has a right to exist. I don't say that it shouldn't. And then again, it does do good things. It does do bad things. It does things questionable almost. And it does things that are sort of like why didn't you do that? Or it's very easy to question, but it has a right to exist. Whether it's going to last forever is another thing, and what comes after that.
Yeah, I mean, NATO and the UN are kind of the future of what Western democracy is going to look like. The UN and kind of the IMF and the World Bank Forum, other capitalists, they're mostly neoliberal for the most part. And like David has said, they have done some stupid stuff that I am not proud of, but they are intergovernmental bodies, which if David has read up on his books, Immanuel Kant, intergovernments and the reliance on capital through these countries make it so we haven't had another world war since World War II, which it's kind of unprecedented for 80 years, considering that the first World War from the second one was only a gap of 10 and 20, 30 years. So, I mean,
again, the Second World War was a sort of a shockwave after the First World War. It was almost inevitable that it was going to happen, seeing as the German people, the Austrian people, basically anyone that was in the Central Powers were humiliated.
Well, I mean, we humiliated Germany again by splitting it up into half and splitting up Berlin into 4 parts. I mean, we did the same exact thing, but we had intergovernmental powers that made it so if a right-wing government was to ever rise to power, and this also happens with left-wing governments too, it's a stopgap on the extremes of the political compass to make sure that we still have, democracy and a way, the capitalist mode of thinking. And you may think that's bad. I think that's great. And I think the UN has tried to gone in, has done mutual aid in different countries, has tried to, save lives in these impoverished countries. So I think that's a good thing. NATO is obviously a great thing. Protecting democracies from the nuclear threats of North Korea, of China, and of Russia. And you could name them all. Venezuela, Cuba. It's these structures are gonna stay pretty much till the day I die. Is there a better solution? I mean, if Cuba, Obama tried, to lift sanctions on Cuba. but I mean, they still, no matter, I'm sure David will say their literacy rates are great, or they had a nice vaccine, or they have good public schools and stuff like that. There's still no free elections, and there's still no capitalism. There's no incentive to work, to get a job, to have a family, to create, to do stuff like that. And so there won't be a better solution in my lifetime than NATO and the UN. And I would like to see, this is kind of like my 500-year prediction. I know no one asked, but I would like to see one government for all people in the UN, a kind of a government that, recognizes kind of the SOCDEM things that I believe in, and kind of, solves politics for good, lets people focus on their families, their work, their friends. I think David is, I commend David for, wanting to change the world, wanting better, thinking about communism, stopping like the 40-hour work week, stuff like that. I think we can easily do that during capitalism. We might not see it in our lifetime, but as long as we keep what we have and we don't destroy it, and we just keep improving, there will be a time where it's more profitable for workers to work less hours. It'll be more profitable for people to travel the world, and we'll have less scarcity, but there still is scarcity in the world. So it's kind of where I get hung up on communism. But
So next thing we got to talk about, anarchism. What are your thoughts on anarchism?
Fine. They're allowed to exist like any other group.
Well, more on the ideology, like
yeah, you can,
like, what do I think of the ideology?
Yeah, we're more talking about ideologies here.
I feel like they've got a lot of the social sort of stuff right. However, I think they forget that there has always been people above to lead, and there's always been people below to obey, I guess. I feel like anarchism could work in certain cultures, like they have been primitively before. I feel like it could exist under certain conditions. Am I an anarchist, or would I be an anarchist or anything? No, I'm not really anything for that. However, they are an ally. They're definitely someone to. As a communist, they're sort of someone that's necessary for the revolution. I feel.
yeah.
If that makes sense, they're someone they're an ally, so they're fun. I don't know. I don't have any qualms with anarchism. I honestly don't. I feel like the only thing that I'm a bit iffy about is who's there to regulate the laws, and why are we just entrusting our society on goodwill when goodwill only goes so far.
Yeah, that's the anarchism is good until there's anarchy, until you need someone to lead. It's quite frankly,
and even then there's groups that lead these anarchy groups, so
well, I mean, look, democracy does not prevail in anarchism. It's kind of like follow the leader. That's the thing. Ultimately, someone does have to lead, and then we follow their chosen ideology. So
yeah,
I mean, I kind of I empathize a little bit with like the small tax conservatives, and wanting to get government, or say if you have more money than most people, wanting the government to spend less of it. I mean, you're advocating for your best interests as a rich person. And I mean, if you kind of, want the state to be out of your life, and you have a gun, you can defend yourself. It's kind of what I said earlier, go live in Texas. It's the perfect state. And I think this is kind of, I think feudalism, God, federalism kind of plays into anarchy a little bit, because it lets states be able to go their own way in a bigger federal government. So anarchism,
I mean, sorry, you go, and then I'll just answer that, because I feel like I've got something to say about that.
I mean, all I was really gonna say was I used to be an anarchist like a year or so ago, but then it's just if you don't know who's gonna lead after after the government's gone. So
Yeah, I mean, like you can rely on goodwill, and I feel like it works. It definitely works in communes and in small groups. It definitely works. But when it's applied to, I feel like a bigger social, multicultural sort of group, I don't feel like it has a chance of
I don't
working
think
at
it
all.
does. I don't think it does work because
um,
this is why I'm also against co-ops too. Like I think people should have the right to unionize, but we do need leaders who have been trained. We do need a hierarchy in the workplace.
yeah,
Workers workers should get better pay for their work than what the market commands because they are there doing the work. But or what the company demand or what the company wants to pay them. We should try to, cut profit where we can for some of these bosses. But I think, anarchism and co-ops and stuff like that, it's just there needs to be, if you have more experience, you need to be higher up, you need a retraining, you need a churning out, you need like a natural, I think that's just how humans kind of organize themselves. It's more of our natural state. So
yeah, it's more of our natural state in a bigger group because that's the thing. I feel like anarchism does work within certain small groups, in a massive sense, and under like a lot of people. Because everyone's not like-minded. It just won't work. It won't work in a big group. I feel like in small groups, maybe villages and stuff like that, absolutely it could work. It could definitely work, but it's
maybe.
yeah, I don't know. It's complex, and I feel yeah,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, yeah, I kind of empathize with you because I kind of, if humans do have a conscience, which I think and some do, yeah, maybe it could work. I mean,
yeah.
I'd
It
like to
just
see
it
it. I
completely
like
just
to see it
relies on
try.
goodwill. It
Yeah,
completely just relies on goodwill, and goodwill only goes so far. Um, but I feel like what was I going to say before? Something about the states.
I mean, like we saw
States'
Chad.
rights. I think that's the whole thing that anarchists don't like is sort of being told that they can be autonomous under these sort of certain conditions. I feel like that's the reason why they're unhappy. I feel like that's the reason why they're anarchists. They're anti-establishment, and when the establishment tells you that you can only be anarchist under these certain rules, or you can only revolt under these certain rules, or you can only have demonstrations or all that sort of stuff under these certain groups. I feel like that's where they feel like their ideological picture is itself at risk.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's what it is. I feel it's not like they don't. I don't feel like they feel happy when the government says, "Oh yeah, you guys are free. You guys are free to do this and this and this." It's sort of like I feel like to them it's sort of the illusion of free choice because they're these things that you wanted to do, but then the government itself is saying, "Yeah, you can only do these things under this." So it's like I feel like that's the whole sort of qualm that has. But I'm not for anarchism. I'm not an advocate.
In
I don't
a
care. I
broader
actually really
sense,
don't.
I mean, in a broader sense, there's not free choice because there is scarcity. And
Yeah.
kind of to circle back with like anarchism, the the people think they're goodwill or good natured, but then but then they see, oh, I humans have this innate thing in them to move up the ladder, whether it be
Yeah.
class, whether it be social status. And that's where I get worried about anarchism because there's no laws holding people back or controlling the excesses of human nature. So
Well,
that's
I feel like there are still morals. I feel like it's just really way too complex to be able to simplify in any sort of terms. Like as for policing and all of how that sort of goes, it would be something ancient where like someone who does something bad, morally bad, that's collective, because morals are just a collective sort of thing. Um, if someone did something that was bad, then this group outs them all that sort of stuff. So there's community policing, all of that sort of stuff, which I'm not for. I'm not for that. But I feel like they've got ways in which it would make it work. I haven't studied anarchism. I'm not an anarchist. I don't know anything too much about it. But I feel like they've probably got all this sort of stuff worked out in their sort of head. Whether it would be, if it was applied, would work, that's a different story altogether.
Yeah.
Mm.
I guess they'd have community policing, or just a collective moral thing. And the thing is, if people don't stick to that moral compass, people start stealing or killing other people. I feel like people implanted have already a moral compass to say, hey, that's not on, that's not good. So I feel like, I feel in that sort of sense, it's fine, because people will always kind of know what's right and wrong under their own moral compass. And when it's collectivized under a group, it all becomes a mesh between everyone, which I think is good. I think that's fine. But I don't know, anarchism's funny.
I mean, that's the thing, is that everyone isn't equal. That's kind of what anarchists want. It's just not possible. I mean, Alex knows with Chaz in Seattle, during the Black Lives Matter protests, that did not end well. And that was anarchy. So
yeah.
If I could just add an editorial as the moderator still, but like, I mean, Trump was tweeting about it, and he's like, "This is total anarchy," and like in that situation, I mean, people kind of just like took over this area of a city, and it's like, on the one hand, they're demonstrating for something they believe in, but on the other hand, it's like, this is like anarchy in the United States. Like, how is this happening?
Broadcasting corporations be like mostly peaceful protests.
Mm-hmm. That's my editorial.
Yeah. Look, it's all that sort of stuff. And that was anarchy. There wasn't any sort of rule to it, but then I feel like a lot of the peaceful ones were blown out of proportion. And someone could throw a rock through a window or something. Someone could be there to incite something in a peaceful protest, and then it turns into that sort of stuff. So
right,
quick. Mm-hmm.
That's the whole sort of intention of people. I mean, people are already riled up. People are already angry. People are already frustrated. All it takes is for someone to throw a rock through a window, or start spouting violent rhetoric, and then it could tip